When Leonardo DiCaprio's hand started bleeding real blood during Django Unchained's dinner scene, director Quentin Tarantino whispered, "Keep rolling," instead of calling cut. What happened next with that real blood traumatized Kerry Washington so badly that she couldn't eat dinner for 3 months, and the psychological impact nearly ended her career. This is the story of the most disturbing improvisation in Hollywood history. Before we dive into this shocking story, don't forget to comment where you're listening to this from. Now, let's get into the story. December 8, 2011, Evergreen Plantation, Louisiana. The antebellum mansion's dining room was lit by authentic 1850s candles, casting dancing shadows across the mahogany table where some of Hollywood's finest actors sat in period costume. Leonardo DiCaprio, transformed into the vicious plantation owner Calvin Candy, was delivering one of his most intense monologues when disaster struck. During a particularly passionate moment, Leo slammed his hand down on the dinner table, not realizing that a crystal wine glass had shattered moments earlier, leaving razor-sharp fragments scattered across the polished wood. The pain was immediate and excruciating. A large shard sliced deep into Leo's palm, severing a small artery and sending dark red blood streaming across the white tablecloth. But Leo, completely absorbed in his character's racist rant, didn't break. Instead, something terrifying happened. He incorporated the injury into his performance, using his own blood as a prop while continuing Calvin Candy's disturbing speech about phrenology and racial superiority. Kerry Washington, sitting directly across from him as the enslaved Broomhilda, watched in growing horror as Leo's real blood pooled on the table between them. She could smell the metallic scent, could see the genuine pain flickering in his eyes even as he stayed in character. But what happened next would haunt her for years. Leo, lost in the madness of Calvin Candy and high on adrenaline from his injury, reached across the table with his bleeding hand and smeared his blood on Kerry's face while delivering his most vicious lines. Quentin Tarantino, watching from behind the camera, was mesmerized by what he was seeing. "This is the most authentic villain performance ever captured," he whispered to cinematographer Robert Richardson. "Don't stop rolling." But Tarantino didn't see what Kerry Washington saw. The moment when Leonardo DiCaprio's eyes changed, when the injury and the character's evil merged into something genuinely frightening. For those terrifying minutes, Kerry wasn't acting opposite Leo, the respected actor. She was trapped at a dinner table with a bleeding, genuinely dangerous man who seemed to have lost himself completely in one of cinema's most evil characters. The other actors around the table, Jamie Foxx, Christoph Waltz, Samuel L. Jackson, were frozen in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing incredible method acting or watching their colleague have a psychological breakdown. The blood kept flowing, staining Leo's white shirt, dripping onto his boots, pooling on the antique Persian rug beneath the table. And through it all, he never broke character, never called for medical attention, never acknowledged that anything was wrong. Kerry Washington's training at the Juilliard School had prepared her for many challenges, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. As Leo's real blood dripped from her cheek, warm and sticky against her skin, she felt her carefully constructed professional composure cracking. This wasn't stage blood. This was the bodily fluid of a man who seemed to have lost himself in the persona of a sadistic slave owner, and she could taste the copper tang of it on her lips. The scene called for Broomhilda to remain silent and submissive while Calvin Candy delivered his monologue, but Kerry's instincts screamed at her to run. Every survival mechanism in her body was firing, telling her she was in genuine danger. But she was a professional, the cameras were rolling, and Quentin Tarantino's intense stare from behind the monitor made it clear that breaking would end her career in his films forever. Leo, meanwhile, seemed to be feeding off his own injury. The pain was making Calvin Candy's cruelty more vivid, more real. He began improvising lines that weren't in the script, using his bleeding hand to gesture at Kerry, to touch her face, to leave crimson handprints on the white tablecloth. "Look at this blood," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made everyone on set uncomfortable. "This is what happens when you don't know your place. This is what happens when you forget who owns you." Jamie Foxx, sitting to Leo's left, later said he could see the exact moment when his co-star crossed the line from acting into something darker. "Leo's always been intense," Jamie recalled, "but that night, with the blood, with the way he was looking at Kerry, I genuinely thought about breaking character to check on her. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. The scene stretched on for 12 agonizing minutes. Kerry's character had no lines, no way to respond, no escape from Calvin Candy's increasingly unhinged monologue. She had to sit perfectly still while a bleeding man she barely knew smeared his blood on her face and delivered some of the most racist dialogue ever written for a major Hollywood film. Her hands, hidden beneath the table, were shaking so violently that she had to grip her dress to keep them still. When Tarantino finally called, "Cut!" the silence that followed was deafening. Leo, suddenly snapping back to reality, looked down at his mangled hand as if seeing it for the first time. The spell was broken, and the enormity of what had just happened hit everyone simultaneously. Kerry Washington rushed to the bathroom and vomited for 20 minutes straight, not from the sight of blood, but from the psychological impact of what she'd just experienced. The plantation house's antique bathroom became Kerry Washington's refuge as she scrubbed Leo's blood from her face with shaking hands. Each time she thought she'd gotten it all, she'd find another spot, behind her ear, in her hairline, at the corner of her mouth. The metallic taste lingered no matter how much she rinsed, and every time she closed her eyes, she could see Leo's expression as he'd smeared his blood on her skin. It wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio's expression. It was Calvin Candy's, and that distinction terrified her. Dr. Martinez, the on-set medic, found Leo in the dining room, still sitting at the blood-stained table, staring at his injured hand with an expression of confused fascination. "Mr. DiCaprio, we need to get you to a hospital immediately," she said, but Leo seemed to be struggling to return to himself. "The scene," he kept repeating. "Did we get the scene? Was it authentic enough?" The injury required 14 stitches, but Leo's psychological state was what worried Dr. Martinez most. Kerry's husband, NFL player Nnamdi Asomugha, received a frantic phone call at 11:47 p.m. "I can't stop tasting blood," Kerry sobbed into the phone. "It's his blood, and I can still taste it, and I keep seeing his face when he... She couldn't finish the sentence. Nnamdi drove through the night from Los Angeles to Louisiana, finding his wife in her hotel room, sitting in the shower fully clothed, still trying to wash away something that was more psychological than physical. Quentin Tarantino, meanwhile, was in the editing room with Robert Richardson, watching the footage over and over. "This is the most authentic performance ever captured," he kept saying. Leo became Calvin Candy. He actually became him. But Richardson, who had worked with Tarantino on multiple films, was disturbed by what he saw. "Quentin, look at Kerry's eyes in these close-ups. She's genuinely terrified. This isn't acting anymore." The studio executives, when they saw the footage, were divided. Some called it the performance of DiCaprio's career. Others worried about the legal and ethical implications of using footage where an actor was genuinely injured and potentially psychologically harmful to his co-star. The insurance company launched an investigation, and the Screen Actors Guild sent a representative to the set to ensure no safety protocols had been violated. But the most disturbing development came 3 days later, when Leo returned to set with his hand bandaged. He approached Kerry, who had been avoiding eye contact since the incident, and said something that chilled everyone who overheard it. "Kerry, I think Calvin Candy is still in my head. I can't seem to let him go." Kerry Washington requested her own security detail for the remainder of filming, something she'd never done in 15 years of acting. The psychological aftermath proved more complex than anyone anticipated. Kerry Washington, who had built her career on her ability to disappear into characters while maintaining her professional composure, found herself unable to separate the trauma of that night from her character work. During subsequent dinner scenes, she would involuntarily flinch whenever Leo raised his hand, even though his injury had healed and the dangerous improvisation was over. Dr. Elizabeth Hartley, a trauma specialist hired by the studio, conducted private sessions with both actors. Her confidential report, leaked years later during a lawsuit, revealed disturbing details about Leo's psychological state during filming. "Subject exhibits signs of character fusion," she wrote. "The injury appears to have triggered a dissociative episode where the boundaries between self and character became dangerously blurred. The subject used his own blood as a prop without conscious decision-making, suggesting a complete identification with the character's sadistic nature." Kerry's sessions revealed a different kind of trauma. "I keep having nightmares," she told Dr. Hartley, "but they're not about the blood or the injury. They're about his eyes, the way he looked at me when he touched my face with his bleeding hand. It wasn't Leo looking at me, it was Calvin Candy, and Calvin Candy genuinely enjoyed hurting me." The sessions continued for 6 months, long after filming wrapped. The cast and crew who witnessed the incident were sworn to secrecy, but the psychological impact rippled through the entire production. Samuel L. Jackson, a veteran of dozens of films, said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever witnessed on a movie set. "I've done a lot of intense scenes, worked with a lot of method actors," he later revealed, "but I've never seen someone disappear so completely into evil that they'd use their own blood to traumatize their co-star." Christoph Waltz, who played Dr. King Schultz, refused to do any more scenes alone with Leo after the incident. "There's method acting, and then there's madness," he confided to his agent. "Leonardo crossed a line that night, and I'm not sure he found his way back." The remaining dinner scenes had to be rewritten to minimize direct interaction between Leo and Kerry, with carefully placed cameras ensuring they were never alone in frame together. The most disturbing revelation came from the night security guard at the plantation. In his incident report, discovered years later, he wrote about finding Leo at 3 a.m., still in costume, sitting alone in the dining room where the incident had occurred, staring at the bloodstain on the table that housekeeping hadn't been able to remove. "He was talking to himself," the guard reported, "but it wasn't his normal voice. It was that character voice, and he was saying things about ownership and control that made my skin crawl." Django Unchained became a critical and commercial success, earning Leonardo DiCaprio widespread praise for what many considered his most frightening villain performance. The dinner scene, with its real blood and genuine psychological intensity, became legendary in film circles, but the cost of that authenticity was measured in trauma, not just for Kerry Washington, but for everyone who witnessed the moment when acting became something darker. Kerry Washington's career trajectory changed after Django. She became more selective about her roles, turning down several period pieces that involved racial themes. Her representatives cited scheduling conflicts, but industry insiders knew the real reason. The psychological scars from that blood-stained night in Louisiana ran too deep. She couldn't risk experiencing that level of authentic terror again, even in the name of art. Leonardo DiCaprio, meanwhile, never spoke publicly about the incident. In interviews, he would only say that Calvin Candy was the most psychologically challenging role of his career. But those close to him noticed changes. He became more withdrawn, more methodical in his preparation for villainous roles. His subsequent performance in The Wolf of Wall Street required extensive therapy both before and after filming to ensure he could access Jordan Belfort's amorality without losing himself. Dr. Hartley's final report recommended industry-wide protocols for scenes involving genuine injury or psychological extremes. "The pursuit of authentic performance cannot come at the expense of actor safety," she wrote. "What occurred on the Django set represents a dangerous precedent where the line between performance and reality was not just crossed, but obliterated. The use of real bodily fluids as improvised props without consent creates a potentially traumatic environment that no actor should be expected to endure." The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences quietly implemented new guidelines for intimate or potentially harmful scenes, requiring psychological counseling and explicit consent protocols. While these rules were never officially connected to the Django incident, industry veterans knew the connection. Kerry Washington became an advocate for actor mental health, establishing a foundation that provides trauma counseling for performers in challenging roles. Years later, at a private industry event, Kerry Washington and Leonardo DiCaprio found themselves at the same table for the first time since filming wrapped. Those who witnessed the moment described an awkward silence, broken when Leo quietly apologized for losing myself that night. Kerry's response, overheard by several guests, was both gracious and haunting. "Leo, you didn't lose yourself. You found something in yourself that scared all of us, including you." Today, the blood-stained dinner table from Evergreen Plantation is displayed in a private collection, its dark stain still visible despite professional restoration attempts. The scene it witnessed represents both the pinnacle of method acting and its most dangerous extreme, the moment when the pursuit of authentic performance nearly destroyed the people creating it. The real blood that Leo smeared on Kerry's face that night wasn't just a prop. It was a line crossed that changed both actors forever and reminded Hollywood that some truths are too dangerous to capture on film. This is the shocking true story behind Django Unchained's most disturbing scene, where real blood and genuine terror created a moment of cinema that traumatized everyone involved. Thank you for listening to this incredible and disturbing journey into the dark side of method acting. Don't forget to rate our story out of 10 in the comments and tell us which other Leonardo DiCaprio controversial moment you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful performances come at costs that are too high to pay.